I was born in Sudbury in Northern Ontario, grew up in Sault Ste. Marie in Northern Ontario, which was a wonderful upbringing, a very modest family. Sault Ste. Marie was a resource community, a major steel company that employed over half of the labor force of the community. Pulp and paper plant that employed about another 15%. But those were up and down so that the community had its good times and its bad times. It was a wonderful community, and I was very much shaped by the diversity of that community. A great sense of people looking after one another. Began work at about age 8. My father was unemployed for much of my primary and secondary school. He ran a small business, but it fell afoul of one of the downturns, and so life was challenging in that respect. And what I learned is to be self-reliant. That if I needed a new pair of blue jeans or a bicycle, well, you worked and you found those. And so I did my high school in Sault Ste. Marie, and owe so much to the teachers there and the coaches and so on that have been part of my background. And I guess the lessons that I learned from childhood and college is that people are there to help. And if you ask for help, they're very generous, especially Canadians. I was recruited to go to Harvard at about grade 10 when alumni for Harvard were looking even into Canada for scholar athletes. Then I guess by grade 11 I decided that's where I'd go, and I applied in my high school year, of course, grade 13, and went to my principal for the letter of reference, and he said, I won't write the letter of reference. He says, well, if you go to the United States, you'll stay there and we'll be lost to Canada. I said, I don't think so, sir. I think I'll be coming back to Canada. I felt such an attachment to this country. I guess not just roots, but a great belief in Canada as a very unique country. One of the early lessons was in Sault Ste. Marie. I worked for 7 summers at the steel company. I had a scholarship from the steel company. It was called the Sir James Dunn Scholarship. He was the major shareholder. And it provided a summer job. And it was interesting. The summer job for those of us who had scholarships actually were very attractive ones. They were in the offices. So in my case, it was in public relations and labor relations until I was in law school, and then in the legal office. But Sault Ste. Marie is a very competitive place in achievement, in sporting, but other things. And at the steel company, the union organized a blood clinic that claimed to the gates of the company once a month for blood donations. And then it became a competition between each of the departments of this 20,000 employee organization as to which department on a per capita basis would give the most blood in a given month. And the white-collar folks, of which I was a part, felt that they wanted to show the blue-collar folks they could do just as well as better. So I became a regular blood donor at 17, off to Harvard, and get there and said, well, I want to continue this habit of blood donation every quarter or so, and looked for a clinic on campus. Harvard, great medicine, should have a, there wasn't one. Of course, the hospitals were down in the city. But I looked up in the phone book and I found the Red Cross donor clinic down in South Boston. Got on the subway, got off at the other end, and it was a very rough neighborhood. And I thought, my gosh, I've come to the wrong place. I'm going to get mugged. And then I saw the Red Cross sign at actually an abandoned factory building, and went in there, and there was a blood clinic, and there were about 12 homeless men there. Those were the people there to give blood. And all of us, and so I gave the blood, and the nurse then offered me some cash, and I said, well, I wouldn't want to take any money for this. Why don't you give it to one of these men in waiting? Which she did, and then I realized that in the United States, you were paid for donating blood, and you were charged for receiving blood in a hospital, etc. In Canada, you were not paid to donate blood. It was volunteer, and you were not charged in hospitals. And this, again, reinforced in me that we are a unique country, and I wouldn't start saying it's better or worse than any other. It's just unique. And that notion of the public good and the volunteerism spirit is very much part of Canada. And that dwelt on me, and I studied government and law and interest in constitutional themes. And if you look at the United States, which is a remarkable country in so many ways, its constitution was born out of a reaction to a tyrannical king, and using the theories of John Locke and Montesquieu and others, came up with the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution, the major theme of which is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which translates also into the pursuit of private property. So it's very individualistic, that focus. Canada came out of what became provinces, 4 provinces coming together in 1867, in large part because the Union Army had been successful and was all primed up and easily ready to move north and conquer Canada. But the Canadians came together, French Canadians, English Canadians, Indigenous people, and were prepared to combat that. And that drove our confederation of bringing 4 provinces together and later more. But our British North America Act, drawn from the Westminster system and to some extent the French system with their civil law, was based on a public good, which was peace, order, and good government. Not individualistic, but the public good, the common good. In fact, the draft that John Macdonald and George Etienne Cartier submitted to the British Parliament in 1866 had it as theme peace, fairness, and good government. And the British draftsmen eliminated fairness and put in order because they wanted to be sure that the locals were paying for the military that was on the premises of Canada to protect it from the United States. But order and fairness have a similarity in any event. And so that concept of fairness and the public good has been part of our history. And I suspect, as I was sort of formulating my views on who am I and what is our country, that notion of fairness and the public good was an overriding matter for me. Differences. The United States is a country that's been built on immigrants coming to kind of make their own way, and the American dream of becoming quite successful. We've had that as well, immigrants coming to make their own way, but I think there has been a greater tendency to remember those themes of our Constitution, which is peace, order, and good government, and the responsibility to the public good and the collectivity. And the emphasis in the United States has been more the individualism. I think it's important that we not focus too much on differences in the United States other than dealing with the economic challenges that we now have under the Trump administration, because we should not define ourselves as what we're not, but what we are. And I think what we are is a country where equality of opportunity has been very important, and that doesn't mean lowering everybody to the lowest common denominator. It means providing an opportunity for everyone in our country, all of our citizens, and in particular the newcomers, have the opportunity to develop their lives, their communities, their families, and so on, and be, quote, successful. And the equality of opportunity is in very large measure through our public education system, which certainly would rank amongst the very best in the world. Not perfect, but one that works very, very hard at that equality of opportunity, from early childhood right on through to postdoctorate, on to the kind of research activity that occurs in our universities across the country. That's what's special about Canada. I guess the specific question is, like any other job that I took on, dean of a law school, president of 2 different universities, McGill and University of Waterloo in Canada, my roles in governance at Harvard, it was to make the institution better than how you found it. And so that would be my objective when I was invited to become Governor General. My appointment was quite interesting. Mr. Harper was the Prime Minister, and he quite thoughtfully, in my view, established a selection committee made up of people who understood the office of Governor General to provide recommendations to him on the position, and this was in 2010. And in fact, used a similar mechanism of a selection committee for the appointment of the 10 lieutenant governors and the 3 commissioners of the territories. which are all vice-regal positions. And that was very thoughtful because these are complex jobs, and in determining what kind of person you want for them, you should have advice from people who really understand it very well. Unfortunately, that system of a arm's length expert committee ended at the end of Mr. Harper's government. When I received a call in 2010, it's interesting how these things go, and it was the appointment secretary for the Prime Minister saying, would you be interested in being Governor General? I said, well, that's very interesting. I never thought about it, and I'm pretty happy in doing what I'm doing. I was a university president for 15 years in Montreal, and now it's been 9 years in Waterloo, and I love what I do. I have really not thought about changing one bit, just carrying on as long as I have breath in managing university institutions. But I said, look, I know how these things go. You're putting together a long list. If by some fluke the process produced a short list and my name was on it, then give me a call and I'll give it some careful thought. But thank you. And he says, thank you, sir. He called back the next day. He said, sir, the short list is very, very, very short. I said, look, give me a week. I usually consult with 2 or 3 good friends who have provided me advice over the years. And of course, my wife will have to discuss it, and I'll get back to you. Oh, sir, he said, you can't discuss it with anyone. I said, can't discuss with anyone? No, sir, it's absolutely confidential. I said, well, this probably means the end of this conversation, because if I say, yes, I'm interested, and you happen to offer me the job, and I then advised my wife about that, she'd say, well, sir, well, my dear, the suitcases will be on the porch when you're ready to go. Goodbye. And he said, sir, can I get back to you? I said, yes, you can. 15 minutes later, he said, sir, let me emphasize, it's a very, very, very short list. Discuss it with your wife, but please not with anyone else. And he said, this is Wednesday, would you come up and have dinner with Mr. and Mrs. Harper on Saturday evening? And I said, I'll get back to you. So I went home that evening and spoke to my wife. She was not thrilled about upsetting the wonderful life that we had in Waterloo. She ran a 36-horse stable boarding place on our farm and so on, and she'd followed me to the end of the world all throughout her lifetime, and she was hoping that we were settling down. But God bless her, we went up and had dinner with Mr. and Mrs. Harper, and as he came in, he said, I think David may be on side, but Sharon, we have to work with you. And at the end of the evening, she said, well, if my husband wants to do this and you want him, then we'll do it. And she was terrific. 7 years, and it's a 2-person job. And Sharon was magnificent as part of that 2-person team. In a nutshell, the role is to uphold the Constitution and to reinforce the very best values of Canadians. With respect to the interaction with the elected government, in the words of Bagehot, that constitutional lawyer of the 19th century, the job is to advise, encourage, and to warn. And the warn is the tricky part, because the relationship that the Governor General has with the Prime Minister, or the Lieutenant Governors with the Premiers, is very much a personal relationship. And it's good if there's a great trust between the two of them, and there's a frankness, and so that's an important feature. I think you have to understand our Constitution. It's very interesting because it comes largely out of the parliamentary system. And it's, as again Bagehot explained, it's a two-headed government. You have the elected government, Prime Minister, Cabinet, House, Commons, Senate, etc., which are about the business of government. They get elected, they tax, they spend money and protect us and so on. The Crown, the King or Queen, and the Governor General that represents the King or Queen in Canada, are about the dignity of government. And their job is to uphold the Constitution and its laws, to reinforce the most important fundamental values of Canadians. And again, in Bagehot's terms, with respect to the interaction with the Prime Minister in the case of the Governor General and the Premiers in the case of the Lieutenant Governors and Commissioners, It's to advise, encourage, and to warn. And the warn is the tricky part of that, which involves a relationship between the Governor General and the Prime Minister. Prime Minister being the major interlocutor with the Prime Minister, with the Governor General. But that is to speak frankly to the Governor General, and where you have a trust relationship between the two, that works well. And if it's fractious, that can be more difficult, as we've had in several instances in our history, such as the famous Mackenzie King-Byng controversy in the 1920s, etc. So in that role of protecting the Constitution, there's a lot of busyness there because the Governor General signs all legislation into law, signs the orders in council, which are regulations, etc., issues commissions, very large numbers, to ambassadors, to military leaders, etc., and responds to a lot of different initiatives that have to do with basic Canadian values. And in my case, when I was installed as Governor General in 2010, the title of my installation address was "A Smart and Caring Country, a Call to Service." And both those adjectives are important, smart and caring, together. And a call to service is that sense of public good that I spoke about earlier in all Canadians. And early on, we found that the institution of the Governor General was very good at ceremonial things, at processing legislation and signing things into force and so on, and ceremonial activities that celebrated Canadian excellence and Canadian contribution. But it was quite restricted in terms of interaction with other volunteer initiatives and agencies and institutions that were trying to build that better country, that smart and caring country. So there had been a custom of a gift of money, $3 million plus $7 million on a one-for-one match basis to governors as they left office to form a foundation in their name to carry on some of the things they're doing. We concluded early on that it made no sense to create a new foundation every time the government left office. But there was a role for a foundation that would be supporting the outreach activities of the Office of the Governor General and the 10 lieutenant governors and 3 commissioners to assist them in reinforcing Canadian values. So we established the Rita Hall Foundation in 2012. And we had no money, but the Community Foundation of Canada volunteered that its 3 senior executive offices would administer that early on. And then when we finished, my term was to finish in 2005 and extended to 2017, there was a contribution of $3 million from the federal government and $7 million match to match. And we were able quite quickly to raise that match, and indeed today, as we speak, that foundation has an endowment of $50 million and has about $130 million under investment of the various activities it carries out. And these activities were intended to strengthen some of the basic values of Canada, and particularly focus on how do we become smarter and more caring. As that wonderful American statesman, George Shultz, who was Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Labor, and he said, "Trust is the coin of the realm." Where you have trust in the boardroom, the training room, the operating room, the family room, everything goes well. When you don't, it doesn't. Everything else is detail. Trust is that relationship where people can get along in a handshake and have respect for one another. And that's a fundamental feature of that peace, order, or fairness and good government that is Canada. Look, if you really want trust in a smart and caring nation, how do you go about protecting it, reinforcing it, building it, correcting where needed correcting? Well, to have us, it really begins in the individual and what individuals' approach is to questions like trust. And I think, again, that's why our public education system, which reflects the full diversity and great respect for a variety of views, is important. So it begins with trust within oneself. Shakespeare's famous lines from Hamlet. Polonius was advising his son, who was off to Germany, 12th century, I guess, to see the continent before coming back. And he said, "To thine own self be true, and it shall follow as the night the day. Thou canst not then be false to anyone." And when you say to thine own self be true, what is it you're true to? And it's your basic values. And we started this discussion with what I learned from my early upbringing. Well, growing up in Sault Ste. Marie, I learned the values of trust. Trusting on others and being a trustworthy person, doing my share and doing more, etc. So that begins with the person. And again, in my own case, I say all the important things in life I've learned from my children and now my grandchildren. We have 5 daughters and 14 grandchildren. And when I had a difficult moral decision to make in my various careers in life, law professor, institutional leader, I'd always ask myself the question, how do I explain this to my children? And I've learned so much from my children in terms of those values. Empathy, not sympathy. Empathy is, I see your situation and I walk together with you to overcome it, etc. Empathy, I think, is a verb which says roll up your sleeves. It's part of the caring, part of the smart and caring. In a nutshell, it is to come to understand and see the joy that comes from helping others. Seeing the world as you not being the center of the university, but you being here on the face of the earth to lead a healthy life, and that healthy life involves having a very high regard for your neighbor. All of the great religions of the world, in some form or another, have the golden rule at their heart. Explained sometimes different ways, but that's it. And the golden rule is simply love thy neighbor as thyself, or treat thy neighbor as you would have yourself treated. That's a pretty good fundamental. But it's more than just a fundamental rule, follow this and life will be good for society. It's really a sense of the joy that comes from finding ways to help other people see that equality of opportunity. David Brooks is a columnist for the New York Times who writes a lot about this, as Robert Putnam from Harvard does about social capital. One of Brooks' book is called The Two Mountains, and he describes the first mountain as how the high achievers rise up, going stage by stage, successive plateaus of accomplishment, being admired by their peers, competitive, very, very good. And from that experience of climbing up that first mountain and feeling kind of proud of yourself, there comes a satisfaction, and indeed to some extent a happiness. But then Brooks says, if you're really lucky, you look across the valley to the other mountain. It's pretty steep too, but others are on that mountain are having difficulty reaching the first plateau and the second plateau and the third plateau. And if you're really lucky, you'll walk across that valley and you'll take in hand one of those people climbing up and help them along. And as you see them succeeding in getting up the slopes, your satisfaction and happiness on the first mountain becomes joy. For me, that is joy. One of the very influential books for me was C.S. Lewis's book called Surprised by Joy, and it was his conversion from atheism to Christianity. And I'm a Christian, I'm a lay reader in the Anglican Church, so my faith means an awful lot to me as well in terms of where you find joy. Well, I guess we're trying to put together what we discussed in the last 25 minutes or so, Luke, but I would say, number one, developing a curiosity which leads to innovation, an open-mindedness, the smart part, where you are willing and ready and anxious to learn from others with different views and different perspectives, etc. Thirdly, to be a builder of trust, to see trust as an important part of who you are, and to understand what integrity means to you and how you practice that integrity. And how do you find that? Well, if you're lucky, really lucky as I have been, as I said in my installation speech, if you remember only 3 words of what I say to you today, they are cherish our teachers. Cherish our teachers. Because apart from our family, it's our teachers, our coaches, our mentors, sometimes our bosses that have had the most influence on us. And if you're really lucky, you'll find numbers of people that you see as a exemplar, someone who's a mentor, or simply a person that you know and admire very much. And what is it you admire, and then you emulate those activities and practice them yourself.
Thank you for tuning in to this interview of the One Canada Project. I'm very grateful you're on this journey with me. Don't forget to follow or subscribe depending on your platform, and please give us a like if you enjoyed the interview. Thank you for being with me today.